So tonight on the show, we have Mr. Nou Vada, a blockchain entrepreneur. Mr. Vada, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your journey in CoinShare as the founder or co-founder.
So CoinShare really started out as a sort of an inside joke between me and a couple of friends. I was an insurance lawyer and I did a lot of work with insurance companies in Papua New Guinea. And so that was pretty much my life for a couple of years. And around 2016 and 17, we started hearing about the emergence of blockchain technology outside of its more traditional context, which was cryptocurrencies. We started hearing about what it could do to industries, entire sectors, entire economies. And almost globally, the discussion was always around which were the top 5, top 10 industries that blockchain was going to disrupt. And insurance kept being, I think, in the top 5 every single time. And being an insurance professional, I decided to look at this and try and figure it out. How would it happen? How would blockchain actually disrupt insurance? And so I set out doing this with a bit of cynicism, and then 3 months later, I was thoroughly convinced that blockchain technology will transform how sectors like insurance work. But far beyond insurance, it will probably affect everything where you need some sort of database mechanism and control over how resources or commodities are shared in a value chain. And so we set about trying to design a blockchain-based insurance marketplace, not just for local use, but for deployment at a global scale. That journey's now taken us about 15 months. It's taken us around the world, where we've taken our idea and sort of tested it out there with the blockchain community globally, in places like Singapore and Taipei, Chinese Taipei, and Australia, where we spent a couple of weeks in Melbourne meeting with some of the greatest or some of the best minds in blockchain research around economics, around law, but also around the ICT space, the coding space. The feedback we've received is excellent, but yeah, one of the challenges we face now is trying to make sense of where the startup goes, because it appeals to an international, global space, but the intentions of its co-founders, myself and Mr. Rex Power, in wanting to keep the startup a local startup here in Papua New Guinea. So we're navigating through all these different challenges. And on top of that, we're also we feel that it is an important public duty on our part as people knowledgeable in the blockchain space to try and educate our community on what this technology is, what it can do, what it can't do, and what are the opportunities and what are the risks around it.
So I understand that blockchain is a new technology. It's fairly new, not only in Papua New Guinea, but around the world. There is a lot of, I guess, confusion, especially when we group words like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, all under, blockchain. So can you please, while I have you here, explain basically in layman terms what it's all about?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest elephant in the room right now. Not just in PNG, but globally. There's a lot of confusion around all these fancy terms and how they connect to each other. So if we could visualize it, blockchain would be a tree, cryptocurrency is just one branch in the tree, and Bitcoin is just one leaf on that branch. There are many other branches, and there are so many more leaves. So Bitcoin is an example of a use case of blockchain, the use case being cryptocurrencies. Where blockchains get interesting is that they are a database model that does not have an administrator. And so the emphasis is removed from an administrator setting rules to a community of computers setting rules and following these rules and enforcing them. And decisions are made on the protocol or on the rules of this community based on the consensus of the majority of the community. It's quite similar to how traditional Melanesian society structured themselves. So I guess in a way it makes a lot of sense to people from this part of the world, Papua New Guinea and the Pacific, because it shows a parallel between how our pre-colonial societies operated, right. Where it was all done through community consensus, where you had the leaders of every household meeting at a houseman or a housemary and making decisions that would drive the community forward. The hierarchical systems that conventional database systems use, they're problematic. They're problematic for, especially when you have to deal with giving human actors in a given structure the discretion to decide to do something. And the assumption then is we put our faith in these human actors to do the right thing every time. Yeah. That doesn't always happen. So you could step away from the tech talk and we'll look at bureaucratic systems that are built on human actors doing the right thing all the time. And when they start to not do the right thing, that's when we start seeing corruption and incompetence and inefficiencies in our systems. And it costs, the taxpayer a lot of grief and a lot of money trying to sort these things out. It takes up administrative and judicial time revisioning decisions that have been made badly. And it takes away from, government agencies and their mandate to actually carry out their legislated or policy tasks by creating all these disputes and bottlenecks around that. What blockchains can do is, if you digitize some of these systems and you remove administrator-oriented bottlenecks and replaced it with consensus systems that are difficult to manipulate, then you could create systems that are sort of more equitable, more accountable, more transparent. And so, what we're trying to do now is go out and talk about what these things can do, far away from what, the discussions around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, which, like I said, is just a very limited view of what, blockchains are and what they can do. So, Bitcoin is basically a digital currency. It's called a cryptocurrency because it lives on a blockchain. What makes it interesting is that it is unregulated. It's exciting, but it's also dangerous because it's unregulated. This means that there's no central bank to impose rules on how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies behave. In the positive side, it means no banking fees. Commercial banks don't impose banking fees. But the dangerous thing about it, and one of them is because it's decentralized, there's no centralized control over it. So say if you own a bank account and you lost your card and PIN, you could contact your local bank to have your card cancelled and restrict access to your account. If you lost the cryptographic keys, the equivalent of a PIN number and a card on the Bitcoin network, and if someone had it, there would be no way in the world for you to stop that someone from accessing your funds anywhere in the world because, quite simply, it's built on a blockchain where there's no administrator.
I'm Leanne Jorari in Manila, and you're watching Business PNG.
So that's a good segue, Mr. Vada. Can you explain to us basically, you mentioned how it will affect societies, the government's push right now is to go into digitalization. We run the risk of basically leaving behind a lot of our population who almost 80% of them are in rural areas. So how does this affect the society?
It affects it in a number of ways. The most obvious one being that when you're introducing these technologies, they require revisiting the existing legal and policy frameworks around everything, around money, around logistics, around trade, around the structure of our governance systems, the structure of our banking systems, our financial sector, how we distribute resources and how we manage our records, public records, school records, corporate records, business records, hospital records, for example, how we manage our data around our identities, and all the things you could build on top of having an identity, elections, census, and even in Bougainville, for example, with the referendum. Yeah. When you're introducing these systems, you got to revisit how our existing systems work and try to figure out how these new systems are going to come in and disrupt these existing systems, because that's what these technologies like blockchain are referred to as. They're called disruptive technologies, because they can seriously alter how society works or how segments of society function. And so how society will be affected, especially in the context of PNG, where a large cross-section of our society is rural-based. I think there's a danger in that. First of all, I think there's a danger, but there's also great advantages. The dangers lie really in how well we can integrate these technologies for PNG conditions. I am a big advocate of building local solutions here instead of exporting foreign solutions that quite simply don't work for us. PNG's political, economic, and social history is really about exporting one foreign concept after another and seeing a lot of them not work. Yeah. Our best moments have been as a nation when we built some stuff from the ground up, using local knowledge and using the best of what the world has to offer. In the sphere of blockchains and other inclusive technologies, the approach we're taking, the people from Blockchain Pasifik and certainly the technical stuff that my startup CoinShow provides for this platform, is that we want to explore solutions that are homegrown, that are developed by public servants inside the current sphere, people in the private space inside our local economy. We're the ones who can articulate these problems better.
Okay, so tell us more about Blockchain Pasifik. How has the reaction been like?
Oh, it's been amazing. We started out with this idea to host this event. We were doing work with CoinShow, and there was a bit of frustration around not being able to find local talent around blockchain. So we thought maybe we could host this event and attract people who are interested in the blockchain space as developers, as researchers, and utilize some of their talents and skills. It's now taken a life of its own. It's become bigger than what any of us imagined. We're currently partnered with the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, one of the biggest technology universities in Australia. Yep. They have the Blockchain Innovation Hub, which is the biggest blockchain research institute in the Southern Hemisphere.
Right.
They're now partnered with us, and they're sending, I think, 4 speakers, very high caliber leaders in the field of economics and law, to come and present at Blockchain Pasifik. We've partnered with Consensus, the biggest blockchain development company in the world. They're based in New York and around the world. They're sending their chief technical officer from New York to Blockchain Pasifik. He'll be talking on decentralized banking systems. These are basically banking systems you can deploy in rural areas that don't use conventional banking structures. They use technology and specifically blockchain technology to sort of create a resilient banking system that I personally think could work in this country in terms of banking the unbanked in the rural areas of this country and giving them access to banking facilities. We're also doing a lot of partnerships with the Australian government around this. The Australian government's coming heavy with one of the more interesting components of Blockchain Pasifik, which is the Blockchain Pacific Junior Challenge, where we have 4 high schools in Port Moresby, Kila Kila Secondary, Port Moresby International School, Cop College, and Don Bosco Technical Secondary. These 4 schools have sent their best and their brightest, and it's basically a research hackathon. We've tasked them to come up with solutions using blockchain technology for 4 very pressing problems in the country. So I think Kila Kila Secondary is working on a proof of concept for land title registry management using blockchains. How to defeat the whole issue with duplicate titles being created using technology, using blockchain technology. Port Moresby International School is looking at creating a digital third-tier currency that should be sanctioned nationally by the central bank and can be used in areas and sectors where physical cash is problematic. For example, you can't take physical cash to certain locations in the country because it's just too risky. But if you had a digital form of kina, you could deploy it to these parts of the country with ease. They'd be very easily insurable, and also you could use this in sectors where there's a lot of resistance to taxation. For example, the trade store sectors around Port Moresby, and especially the ones that are foreign owned, foreign operated, where research has shown that these sectors don't do banking, and because they don't do banking, it's difficult to tax them, and because it's difficult to tax them, you question, what utility do they bring to the national economy if they're not being taxed. And so if you had a digital currency, it would have the effect of being a legal tender. And if you had enough network effect and community utility around that currency, these entities that are difficult to tax would be forced to sort of use these currencies, and then you could establish their taxation footprint, and that data would be useful to IRC in calculating taxation and all of that stuff. Port Moresby International School is working on that. Cop College is working on something that's also very interesting and very pressing, and that is they're trying to propose a digital identity registry and management system. So basically an NID, except it's built on a blockchain, and it's built in such a way that it's versatile enough for you to deploy that data set for elections, deploy it for a census, deploy it for a referendum in the case of Bougainville, and also deploy it to more routine aspects of governance, such as patient management records in public hospitals, school management records for students, workers' compensation, MVIL, motor vehicle registration. So if you could build this digital identification system for all citizens, then you could build any number of subsystems on top of it. And so they're looking at that. Cop College, Don Bosco Technical Secondary has taken on a very interesting topic. They want to look at building an emissions trading platform, climate change. So this is a global solution for a global problem, which is basically how do you protect forests in the nations that have forests, by getting polluters to compensate them, and building this outside of, it's still related to the Paris Agreement mechanisms, but it's built outside as almost like a voluntary private cross-border arrangement. You could do these with blockchains. And so these kids are, they're pretty awesome to work with. We're working very closely with them in developing these concepts, and they will be part of the presentation at Blockchain Pasifik. And we want to show our leadership in the country that, these kids, they are the stakeholders of all these efforts we're making. And they're not sitting down and waiting. They're already deploying their minds to come up with solutions using technology. So it's going to be a very, I think, a very powerful event, and it's going to, I think, attract a lot of good dialogue, at least going forward within the private space, but also within government. It's my dream to put the kids who are proposing these land solutions in the same room with the lands minister and let them pitch to him and say, you know what, we can rebuild the land registry system using our model.
I'm Leanne Jorari in Lorengau, and you're watching Business PNG.
This all sounds really interesting, and I mean, I'm excited to see basically what the conference has to offer and the brilliant minds that will be coming. So, what besides what you expect, what can you tell us, or what can you expect for years to come, like 5-10 years? How do you expect these technologies to, disrupt here in Papua New Guinea? Once
our leaders realize what these technologies can do. There's a number of disruptive technologies. Our working theory about all of them is that the one that will take off the fastest is blockchain, because it can create governance solutions that we so desperately need right now inside our public service, inside our private space as well. And so we're hoping this event will trigger dialogue beyond just Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and looking at how this technology platform can create real-world solutions. And so part of the experience of this event will be putting forward a document to the government, which is currently being developed by the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology and us working together. And this will be basically a position paper on blockchain technology in the Pacific and in PNG, what it can do, what it can't do, and where governments can take it if they want to benefit meaningfully from it. We hope to get cabinet and policy dialogue going immediately around transferring or starting to experiment with this technology in small-scale government processes, and then with the success and proving the track record that this can work, we start scaling it upwards into making even bigger systems work more efficiently. We also think that it's important for PNG to put its hand up in the world and say, this is a place where we can welcome startups from around the world that come in and collaborate with local knowledge, local minds, and build local solutions. But those solutions can then be taken and exported around the world. So, for example, the climate change emissions trading solution can be exported to every forest producing nation in the world if we made it work and if we actually designed it. So the same with the land stuff, the same with the ID stuff. And so PNG could very well be a hub that can take care of, it can actually attract a lot of these innovators around the world to come and innovate here with us and build stuff. But I mean, a lot of that is just high level forward thinking. But in terms of a boots on the ground approach, the most meaningful outcome we can get in terms of causing some disruption around the current systems is after this event, the government saying, all right, here's a system you can look at and see if you can make efficient. And like I said, we believe in creating local solutions. So we'd build something from the ground up and really make a case for other systems to be transferred in. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Vada, and I look forward to seeing more, especially in that subject, and you and your team, a bunch of young Papua New Guineans, basically disrupting
technology in Papua New Guinea. So thank you so much for your time, and look forward to the blockchain event in October.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
And that's all we have for this episode of Business PNG. For more information, or if you would simply like to view this episode again, visit EMTV online at the URL at the bottom of your screen. Or to simply join the conversation, like our page on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at the Twitter handle at Business PNG. Until next week, have a pleasant evening. I'm Leanne Jorari, and this was Business PNG.